Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 10th of May 2016, now more than a little bit after 1 o'clock, a little bit of a technical problem there, but we are delighted to be with you. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather reports across the country, very interesting. The Isle of Man wins with sunshine, apparently. We've got rain in southeast London. It's wet in Norfolk. Plymouth's damp and muggy with a threat of thunder this afternoon, I believe. Manchester is overcast. Rhondda is cloudy but warm. And that's about it, I think. Not too bad. So we've had some very interesting communications from viewers over the last couple of days, and we're particularly interested in this one. It's a Mirror story which says that in Glasgow, so north of the border, there's going to be new NHS testing to see whether mums have been drinking. So here we are, to be tested for alcohol amid fears pregnant mums are drinking. And what the person had said to us is, if you couple this with a named person scheme, this test is absolutely ideal to flag up potential children for adoption. And what's interesting in the article is it says, well, of course, if you're upper class, if you're professional, you're going to be a lot more sneaky in covering up the drinking. But this test is going to identify whether mum's been drinking. And of course, this can then be flagged up through the named person scheme. Interesting little bit, we're calling it a lie. The occasional drink will not be highlighted by the study, researchers said. Well, I absolutely don't believe that, Mike. I think everything they find is going to be flagged up because the ammunition that mother's been drinking can be used as the basis for taking the children away.
Did they say how they intend to discover this?
How are
they going to ascertain whether people have been drinking or not?
Well, it's a test on the meconium, which is the basically it's baby's poo, which they can now test to see whether there's any alcohol going into the baby in development.
Right.
So very interesting, isn't it, that the state is encouraging, of course, mothers to abort babies. But mothers mustn't have a drink because possibly that puts a bit of alcohol into the baby.
So we're not going to give them bedside breath tests or anything like that?
No, this is testing the fluid, basically.
Right.
Well, let's combine it with this one, which we mentioned yesterday, and this has produced quite an interesting response from people. So we pointed out that the plan was to induce mindfulness into Parliament. Many of our MPs can't function except that they are coached via mindfulness gurus. And this is now going to be spread out across the country. Well, thank you to David Scott for flagging up this one, because here we've got Mindfulness Scotland. And this charity says that mindfulness should be introduced everywhere. Trust these people. We've no idea who they are, but they say the evidence is irrefutable that everybody needs to be brought up in the mould of mindfulness in order to perform. Centuries ago, thousands of years ago, people simply couldn't function because they weren't using mindfulness, but now relax because it's coming into Scotland. And if you've missed it, we'd just like to say to you, we'd be very interested on your thoughts of this, we think, particularly dark and sinister logo. And I noticed this, Mike, because the little man in the centre of the tree has got his upreaching arms.
Stretched hands once again, yeah.
So I think this is welcoming in the new spirituality, and I think it's pretty dark.
I was just going to say, listening to any of the interviews on Radio 4's Today programme this morning, every single one, maybe exaggerating a little bit, had the word mindful included in it. Are you mindful about this? Are you mindful about this? Yes, I was mindful about that.
Right.
It's absolutely being pushed.
It's being pushed, and I'm going to say a big prize to one of our viewers who sent in this email, which I will read through because I think it is so very interesting. It says, "Dear Brian, as someone who tries to practice mindfulness in his daily life as a part-time Taoist Buddhist follower, I've considered your recent view of mindfulness with slight puzzlement. As a spiritual method, it's extremely beneficial in helping to calm the mind when life stresses become too much, a thing that I was thinking cannot be a bad thing in as stressful a place as in the workplace. I then had a revelation and realized that mindfulness in the workplace can in fact be used by the transformational common purpose working outside authority agenda being pushed in the workplace and large organizations. Mindfulness in itself is not the issue, it is how it can be used to reduce opposition to the common purpose agenda in the workplace that is the issue. For argument's sake, let's say a large number of senior managers in the NHS have been trained to cause disruption, chaos, and light transformational fires in the NHS organisation. This action can be countered by those in the organisation opposed to such strategies. Now let's say in the NHS large numbers of people are being taught the benefits of mindfulness, which are huge and varied. They will be thinking more in terms of the moment rather than what is going on in a bigger picture around them in the NHS organisation. This will allow the transformational common purpose change agents to face less opposition, as those of a more mindful disposition will be less inclined to look at the bigger picture and the changes going on around them. I asked this question: is the common purpose agenda being taught to the few to sow chaos, whilst mindfulness is being taught to the many to cleverly reduce their awareness of what is going on around them? If so, this is a very clever, insidious, callous psychological attack against how the workplace or organisations operate by using mindfulness as a way of reducing opposition to the transformational agenda. And I've got to say, Mike, I think that this person is absolutely spot on.
Nails and heads.
Just utterly brilliant. And of course, we are getting more and more communication from people inside the NHS who are both astonished and increasingly, I'll say frightened is the correct word in some cases, by the callous bullying nature of the management structure inside the NHS, where clearly there is no care, compassion, love for the patient. Of course, there are still good staff in the organisation, but we're talking about the transformational change.
The other point that needs to be made here, of course, is that what is being presented to people is not Taoist or Buddhist mindfulness. This is what's being called secular mindfulness. There's no spiritual aspect to it whatsoever. And actually, the Buddhist establishment is extremely concerned about this brand of mindfulness is being described as mindfulness, and then people who use mindfulness in a spiritual way immediately assume that that's what's being taught. It's not. It's something quite different.
And the seat of this, of course, is the university, Oxford University in particular, but essentially unknown people pushing out this agenda, which is now being rammed through central government, through Westminster, of course with the help of the Cabinet Office, and following hot on the heels of the Behavioural Change Unit set up by Francis Maude and now being pushed by Letwin. Well, if we've seen change in the NHS, it's coming in thick and fast in the police. And this was a significant article, we think, in the Express. It's saying that more than 800 police have quit almost in a block in Police Scotland. And these people are talking about low morale. They're talking about disliking the whole management system within the single Police Scotland force. And they are now deciding that they're going to take early retirement, try and get hold of their pensions and get out. So we're saying this is exactly, this is success, because this is exactly what Police Scotland was designed to achieve. It was to disrupt the system and to get rid of all the experienced officers so that, of course, the police force starts to collapse. Same technique used in the military, where people were encouraged to leave. And ultimately that's left the services, particularly at the moment, with a massive hole amongst experienced people, NCOs in particular. Well, let's have a look at this, because south of the border, something else is going on. We've got the Daily Mail. Is this the most embarrassing Running Man police video yet? Kingston Force joined the Global Dance Challenge by arresting a suspect but agreeing to let her go if she wins a dance battle. Well, I'd encourage people to go on to the Daily Mail site and see this video because it is astounding. Police officers in uniform, in police time, reduced to playing as children. This is a breakdown of discipline, Mike. I've got to say, if I was a senior officer in the police force, and of course this is Met Police, I'd have all these people on a charge. That's the way it would work in the military. What is going on here? These people are not thinking normally. And of course, the public's paying for it. Well, let's remember that Bernard Hogan Howe is still the commissioner in charge of the Met, and he's just had his contract renewed by Theresa May. So we are seeing breakdown in the NHS, we're seeing breakdown in the police. There is a reason for it. It's not happening by accident.
Okay, bit of success. This is Laurie Love, and for those that don't know, he is accused of hacking systems in the States operated by the Fed, by NASA, the FBI, Department of Defense, and the Environmental Protection Agency, amongst others. And the Department of Justice in the United States is trying to have him extradited, and he faces 99 years in prison if he's found guilty over there. And so the National Crime Agency got involved under Operation Last Resort, and they seized a load of electronic devices, computers, hard disks, and so on, and they attempted to find out what was on those disks. And he was arrested last October for alleged offences under the Computer Misuse Act. So eventually he was released on bail, but his equipment wasn't returned to him, and so he has taken a civil action against the National Crime Agency to recover the devices that were continued to be seized by him. Now, while he was under arrest by the National Crime Agency, they attempted to have him reveal his encryption keys for the encrypted data that was on these disks, which he refused to do. And so the National Crime Agency then attempted to use his civil suit, which he had brought to try and get these devices back. They attempted to turn that on its head and get the judge to force Love to reveal his encryption keys. Well, pretty delighted to say that today the judge has turned down the attempt by the National Crime Agency to get Laurie Love to hand over his encryption keys, and so he will now proceed with his case. But the National Crime Agency, the right to remain silent was not breached in this case, which is quite a different scenario, because we've heard of people being put in prison in the past for this type of thing.
We have. It's interesting you actually ask what the National Crime Agency is, because if you look at what they're actually doing, what the success of Britain's FBI is, a lot of people are saying this is a disaster. So we watch with interest.
Yes. Now, the ICIJ, absolutely desperate to try to reinvigorate people's apathy towards the Panama Papers, have decided to make the data available. I have to say, actually, if you go and look at this website at the Offshore Leaks database, they have done it very well. So I'm not going to criticise how they're presenting this information. It's done very well, but there were a couple of little details. When you go to the website, the first thing they want you to do is to agree to a disclaimer. And the first thing they say is there are legitimate uses for offshore companies and trusts. And I would just like to ask, what are they? Because I'm not convinced that there are legitimate uses for offshore companies and trusts. But I mean, if somebody can suggest a legitimate use, that's fine. And they go on to say, we do not intend or suggest or imply that any persons, companies, or other entities included in the database have broken the law or otherwise acted improperly. I suppose they have to say that. Many people and entities have the same or similar names, and they just go on to ask you to identify people properly before you jump to any conclusions. But I just want to remind everybody, this is in their frequently asked questions over this. Who does fund the ICIJ? Well, there's an interesting little comment, or at least a statement in that sentence in that statement. Without our readers' support, we cannot exist. Well, that's clearly untrue, because if you look at the next line, the UK column isn't getting funded by the Odysseum Foundation or the Open Society Foundation.
I'm pleased to say not, Mike.
So am I. But the thing is, we genuinely can't exist without our viewers' support or reader support. This organisation can survive quite nicely, it looks like, because they're getting a lot of financing from a lot of big foundations. Are these not exactly the type of organisations that the Panama Papers are there to expose?
Well, one would have thought so, but I think it's highly unlikely Panama Papers are going to go near George Soros's personal wealth, and he's there in Open Society Foundations, of course.
Well, it is interesting because the first name I typed in was Soros, and it comes up with a couple of companies with Soros in the name, which apparently aren't linked to Soros in any way.
Oh, good.
So perhaps some people could do a little bit of research on that. But it is interesting that the Financial Times is highlighting that, of course, Panama isn't the only place in the world where these tax havens exist. The pressure is all on what's going on in Panama and that information. And of course, this is being used as part of the drive for this globalized financial tax system. And this week we have the anti-corruption, David Cameron's anti-corruption conference in London. And we'll see what comes out of this. But as the Financial Times points out, the United States, a key place where you can hide your dirty dealings. And this graph in the middle of this article absolutely shows it. South Dakota trust companies, and you can see the absolute ballooning of this since 2000. So clearly before 1996 or so, or the turn of the century, people didn't see any particular need or legitimate reason to have offshore trusts. This is something that's happened pretty much as the financial system has begun to collapse, and perhaps that gives us a clue as to why people are doing this.
For people who are not very clued up to financial matters, Mike, what are the advantages of being offshore?
Well, it's tax evasion is one of them, and a whole bunch of others about hiding what you own, and so when they come to confiscate assets when the financial system collapses, perhaps yours won't be among them.
Yeah, so we can chase the young man over his encrypted information, but we can't get stuck into people who are hiding the money offshore.
Well, and the key point then is when the financial system collapses and they start to bail in banks, whose money is it's going to be nicked? It's yours and mine, not theirs.
Okay, well, we're looking at a propaganda machine there. We think so anyway. Have a look at this one. This is an email. These people have emailed me before. It's called Care to Action, and they send through alerts. And I was particularly fascinated by this one. Protect young UK girls from violent breast ironing. And I decided to just go and have a look and see who Care to are, Care to petitions. And apparently they were started from an apartment in the States, as you do. They've now got 30 million members, 300 million signatures, 25 million comments, and 1,500 non-profit partners. I wonder who those partners are. I couldn't seem to track them down easily this morning. We'll have another look.
I'm sure it's probably the same foundations we just mentioned with regard to the ICIJ.
Well, I think that's probably true, Mike, which is why this flows in so nicely. Well, have a look at the people yourself. They're all lovely people. They're interested in the environment and helping the world. They've got lovely families. They like walking the dogs. I mean, these are people I'd trust my wallet with without any trouble at all. And what are they doing? Well, we can relax because the change that they seek is all about empowering individuals to live a more conscious lifestyle. A little bit mindful there, I think. Their mission is to make the world a better place by leveraging the power of the internet to empower the widest number of people to engage on any level to make a difference. So these people trust us. We're not sure who they are, but they've built up this massive empire. They seem to be allowed to do what they're doing freely, but we should relax because if we join them, we're going to help change the world to what? Not too sure. Well, when you follow this petition through, it actually brings you back to the Mirror. And here's the story: girls as young as 10 tortured for developing breasts, and it's happening here. The extremely unpleasant base of this article is that the aim is to stop the young girls developing breasts, so they are essentially burnt, is what's going on. And here we've got the first mention of Tory MP Jake Berry. Let's have a look at him. He's the one in the black jumper at the back, if you're confused, not the one with the hat. And he's been campaigning for this. So we don't see a lot of Mr. Berry speaking out about child abuse, but he's suddenly locked onto this, which is part of a global campaign. Well, we did find this in the Lancashire Telegraph, that he'd been welcoming a new law on child abuse. It's the Domestic Violence Crime and Victims Act. And in it, he got quite outspoken, because he said that people accused of seriously abusing children or vulnerable adults have tried to escape justice by staying silent or blaming someone else. Well, I just thought that probably that sounds like most of Westminster, and indeed David Cameron, who's got standing next to him in this picture. So what's going on here? This seems to be global manipulation via the internet to get people to focus on a small, very emotive campaign. Meanwhile, the British government stealing tens of thousands of children from British and other nationalities, and we don't get a squeak out of the Tory MP. Par for the course.
Yes. Right. Wanted to highlight this from Manifesto. Interesting article. Thanks to Vanessa for letting me know about it. And Stranger Than Fiction, How to Keep an Anti-War Movement Down. Now, I'm not going to cover the article itself too much. I do suggest people go and have a look at it. But the one little fact that they pointed to was this Guardian article, which missed from last week. Inside RICU, the shadowy propaganda unit inspired by the Cold War. So RICU is operated from the Home Office, via the Home Office. The Guardian article here says, while the Cold War offensive targeted communism, trade unionists and newspapers in developing countries, the current operations are aimed at Muslims both in Britain and the Middle East. The British-based element of the campaign is part of the Prevent Counter-Radicalisation Programme and is run by the Home Office Research, Information and Communications Unit, or RICU. So it's the Home Office Research, Information and Communications Unit. And they, the Guardian had seen documents from RICU, strategic communications aimed to affect behavioural and attitudinal change. There's the Guardian here pointing out that RICU is based in the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism at the Home Office's Westminster HQ. It's led by a former MI6 officer, Charles Farr, and that's been going since 2007. Much of the work is outsourced, and they are highlighting in particular an organisation called Breakthrough Media Network Limited, which is a company operating from an anonymous office block. They describe it as near Waterloo Station. So this is another little place for a bit of research, I think.
It looks like a black ops operation, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
What's going on here?
But it's all part of the Prevent strategy and building propaganda around that. So keep an eye on this one. And the next is the issue of hospitals. Now, Vanessa Beeley has been talking about this because obviously the organisation that has been sort of driving this campaign, suggesting that Assad has been bombing hospitals in Syria, has been MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières. And the point that Vanessa has been making for months now is that many of these hospitals are no more than tents, in fact, and they're not marked in any way. And in fact, Médecins Sans Frontières at one point admitted that they weren't marking their hospitals because they say they didn't want to put a marker on which would act as a sort of target for them. In fact, the Geneva Convention, as Vanessa points out that it's a requirement to mark your hospitals, that hospitals are protected. It says, just taking something off the internet here, hospitals, both fixed and mobile ambulances, hospital ships, medical aircraft and medical personnel, whether civilian or military, are entitled to protection from hostile fire under the Geneva Convention, provided that structures are marked with a Red Cross or Red Crescent and not used improperly or near military objectives, and staff are properly protected. So that's a key point. They've got to be marked. And so this article here is pointing, Vanessa's been pointing out they haven't been, and that's one of the reasons why hospitals have been hit in the past. But this particular article from Professor Tim Anderson says, over April-May, dozens of people were murdered across Aleppo as civilian areas and major hospitals were bombed by the NATO-backed rebel groups. They were even filmed firing their hell cannons and saying, throw it on the civilians. Meanwhile, Western media ran fantasy stories about Aleppo. And he says, if you believe the Western corporate media might think that the Syrian government, for some unknown reason, has been bombing its own hospitals and had killed Aleppo's only pediatric surgeon, nothing could be further from the truth. And then he goes on to quote a Dr. Nabil Antaki, who said that the media only talk about loss of life in East Aleppo, which is entirely controlled by al-Nusra. The 3/4 of Aleppo under Syrian government control, where numerous paediatricians are practicing, are of no consequence, he said. And he said that, the article says that Dr. Antaki was not the only doctor who was upset by the claims in the Western media, that the Aleppo Medical Association on its Facebook page had denounced Western propaganda campaigns. And so this is another article that I absolutely recommend people read if they want to understand some of the propaganda that's being pushed by the Western press. In the meantime, Saudi Arabia, increasingly out of control. Now they've just had a reshuffle of their government, and the Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir has given an interview to France 24, and he's saying the Syrian crisis will end, and it will end without Bashar al-Assad. It will end with a country that is unified, that has a civil society government, and that has equality. It could take 6 months, it could take 3 months, or it could take 3 years. The choice is Bashar al-Assad's. He will be removed either through a political process or through military force. So that says it all. But the key sentence there was a civil society government, because this is exactly what we've been talking about, the NGO civil society complex, which is driving so much of the trouble in the world at the moment.
Colour revolution, common purpose, and of course common purpose working flat out in the Middle East via its Lighthouse project.
And all driven by the same tax-free foundations that are financing the ICIJ.
Indeed.
And finally, this is an interesting one, because yesterday was the parades in Moscow, and Putin used the opportunity to call for what he described as a non-aligned international security system in the face of global terror. He said, today our civilization has faced brutality and violence. Terrorism has become a global threat. We must defeat this evil, and Russia is open to join forces with all countries and is ready to work on the creation of a modern, non-aligned system of international security. Now, many people are going to be quite cynical about that, because many people don't trust Putin and think that he's kind of a stooge for the global elites, and would see that as a comment which would imply some kind of globalized security system. But I think the key words here, Brian, are non-aligned.
That's what I would pick up on it. He's saying we've got to break away from the fact that it's all got to be on side with UK and America, as one example. And people, I would take it that it's people working across the board to face a terror threat. We could have a discussion on how global we think the terror threat is.
Well, indeed. Well, good news. Last Friday, we wished Tony Blair happy birthday, if you remember, and we did hope that it was his last, as a free man at least. And perhaps that might be the case, because we now have the date of publication of the Chilcot inquiry. I'm quite sure it's a whitewash. We'll see what happens on July the 6th. But of course, the main reason we want to highlight July the 6th is that if this inquiry is being published on that day, I'm quite sure it's going to hide all kinds of ills. And if you didn't see last night's fracking nightmare with Ian Crane, we're going to play out the Crane Report and Fracking Nightmare immediately after this programme. But he was really pointing out that there's going to be quite a bit of fracking news coming out on that day as well. So that's one thing. At least it'll be buried under the weight of Chilcot. I think we need to be looking very carefully at what else is being buried under that.
Very carefully. Just say on that image, it's there's Tony Blair with the troops. Of course, many of those troops now suffering from organophosphate poisoning on the streets, in prison. But you know, the look of him there is he's doing his saviour and pop star act there. So yes, I think it would be wonderful to see Tony Blair in court facing war crimes charges, and perhaps that may happen. Well, the other thing that Tony Blair did, of course, with the help of John Prescott, is usher in the European Union. And Dave Barmby, the man who has been exposing the propaganda and cynical use of the British public to lock us into the European Union, shared this email today. He said that anyone still considering voting Remain in the forthcoming referendum should consider the recent comments of the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And this is the meat of it. Mr. Juncker has said that elected leaders are making life difficult because they spend too much time bowing to public opinion. And Mr. Juncker added, too many politicians are listening exclusively to their national opinion. And if you're listening to your national opinion, you're not developing what should be a common European sense. So don't take any notice of the British voters. Pay attention to what Mr. Juncker says. And down here it gets even better. Mr. Juncker has dismissed previous referendum results and said that there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. That's a dictatorship, isn't it?
That is a dictatorship, yes.
So, as a gentleman said, the European Union constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state, which of course is absolutely true, which is why David Cameron is so frightened of the British public at the moment that he's got to claim we're virtually going to be in World War III if we dare to come out of the European Union. What a scrope that man is. That's the best adjective I could come up with, Mike. I wanted to say
that on the UK.
A scrote, I think so. I think we are.
Okay. The Foreign Office this morning pushed out a little video clip, which was advising expats that they've got to register to vote within the next week or so if they want to take advantage of their postal vote. So I just thought I would have a look around to see how many foreign media organisations had picked this up. So here we've got Greece, and we've got, what's this, is it Australia? We've got Gulf, so the Gulf states. We've got United Arab Emirates. Not quite sure where this one is, and we've got Cyprus. So quite a number of the sort of typical expat locations are publishing this, really advising expats to register for their postal vote. Do you think they're nervous?
I think they're very nervous because I sense, whether it's true or not, Mike, I just sense that so many people are not being swayed by the propaganda. They feel that there is something wrong and they're going to vote with a gut feeling. They're not going to vote with what's been pumped into their heads. And
clearly they may assume that expats would be more likely to vote to stay in.
Well, they may think it, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of expats who do occasionally come back to Britain always say that they're horrified at the change. So maybe people outside the country might look at politics with a slightly clearer eye than those of us who are in the middle of it.
Colonel Richard Kemp, then, we've mentioned him a couple of times recently. He was head of international terrorism for the UK Joint Intelligence Committee, has published an article in Breitbart. You can see from the headline there, Cameron's threat of post-Brexit war is beyond parody. Our EU membership brings the greatest danger. And then he basically goes on to describe the issues surrounding immigration and so on. He's saying that this is not an apocalypse. He's talking about the immigration. It's not an apocalypse, but it's a foretaste of far worse to come. and it has been brought about mainly by the policies of the EU. Yet in words that seem like parody, Mr Cameron begs us to vote to remain in the EU for our own safety. He cites Blenheim, Trafalgar, Waterloo and the First and Second World Wars when British heroism saved the continent. He ends up by saying that, describing a situation where he says this is the peace and security provided by the EU today. The defiant, brave and indefatigable British heroes cited in Mr Cameron's speech would not recognise it as that, but neither would the leaders of the EU comprehend the words of Admiral Lord Nelson when urging vigorous action against the enemy. The measure may be thought bold, but I am of the opinion the boldest are the safest. So Richard Kemp suggesting that people be bold, get out while they still can, and probably going to be in a much better situation.
Certainly, but a big battle still if there's a come out vote, because the machinery to keep us locked in is going to be going flat out. But I'll just add to that, it's becoming increasingly obvious that finally we've got some retired senior military officers beginning to think about what's going on. Colonel Kemp is clearly one of those, but we understand in the last few days that great consternation in the fact that the Royal Navy effectively can't get ships to sea because of manning problems. These have all come out of changes in recruitment brought in by David Cameron's government. So we're desperately short of ships, but we're now so desperately short of men, and particularly the right qualifications, engineers. The ships can't go to sea. We've just scrapped the last of the aircraft carriers, HMS Illustrious. And my prediction was and remains that we can expect to see shortly an announcement that the new Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers will be jointly manned with the French. I think this is the plan. But finally, we've got some senior officers waking up. I'm going to say there's still a lot of cowardice amongst many of them who seem to think that their pensions and the golf club is more important than the state of the nation. I hope a few are listening today. Well, follow this one through, because Business for Britain has been making some interesting statements. Do we trust this organisation? I'm not entirely sure, partly due to the number of the people involved, but you can have a look at their documentation and make your own mind up. So we've got a big list of people who are saying in order to get Britain working properly, we've got to look at our relationship with the European Union. I think it's a fudge. We're going to change it. We're not going to come out. But nevertheless, an interesting statement in this document. If we just expand this a bit on screen, this is the bit. It's talking about the amount of legislation that comes in through the EU. There's been discussions saying that it's anything between 7 and 75%. According to this research, they say that between 1993 and 2014, 64.7% of the UK law can be deemed to be EU influenced. But the critical part has got the red arrow there. This body of legislation consists of 49,699 exclusively EU regulations. And this figure is important because EU regulations are transposed into national law without passing through Parliament. So this is the machinery, Mike, for locking this country into the European Union. It's not just a question of European law coming into the country. It doesn't go anywhere near Parliament. And of course, we're seeing more and more of this law coming in directly through local authorities, often alongside efforts to get European grant funding. And of course, the other thing we've got coming in is EU policy, which is very closely aligned to a United Nations global policy. So Parliament virtually made redundant by the UN. And of course, we're now drowning under 49,000 separate bits of legislation. How can the country possibly work? Well, we'll end on a happy note, and that is that, of course, the American Marines have increasingly been coming up for criticism due to their actions on the world stage. I would blame the politicians who make the decisions in the first place, but credit where it's due. And I thought we'd just come to the American flag etiquette ceremony, which has always impressed me, and I mean that quite sincerely. Because the Americans take great care of the flag, and the American Marines in particular have a very detailed little ceremony where they ensure that the flag is folded correctly. So I've just taken a couple of sequences here, but this is very detailed, and when it's done, it's quite impressive to watch. But the flag is folded up in a particular way. Well, I'd like to thank our viewer for sending us this particular etiquette for the European flag. Let's just bring it on screen. So you can freeze your screen, obviously, and save this so you can practice at home. But this is how to fold the European Union flag. The first folds are quite clear on screen, and they should be followed with this precise sequence of events. I think this is pretty reasonable, Mike, actually.
It ends in the bin.
It ends in the bin.
For our listeners.
Indeed, which is where UK is going to end unless we get out of the European Union a dictatorship, and a corrupt one of that, as fast as possible. That's it for today's news. I'll just say that I will be away till the end of the month. Mike is going to be holding up the fort, well, not quite on his own, because Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire will be joining you.
Vanessa Bailey will be here as well. So we're going to have an interesting couple of weeks.
Interesting couple of weeks. Meanwhile, I will be ferreting out some information from other locations. So keep supporting, and if you're not a subscriber yet for UK Column, please consider becoming one, and your donations keep us going. So if you like what we do, please consider making a donation and tell your friends. Thanks for joining us.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.